Imagine a grand marble foyer filled with the echo of designer heels on polished floors. A pregnant woman stands at the threshold, tears of desperation in her eyes, barred from entering the very hospital her husband built in his own name. This husband, Jonathan Walters, is a tech millionaire whose heart has grown as cold as the steel of his towering office building. He denies his wife the care she needs, shutting her out in her most vulnerable hour. Little does he know, this seemingly broken woman will return not just with newborn twins, but with a powerful billionaire lawyer who plans to turn his world upside down. Emily Hastings first met Jonathan Walters beneath the sparkling chandeliers of a charity ball in downtown Manhattan. This event, hosted to raise funds for clean water initiatives, counted luminaries among its guest list people like Bill Gates and Mark Cuban, dropping by for photo ops. Emily was a young marketing associate at a mid-level firm, tasked with ensuring everything went smoothly. Jonathan was the star of the night, a tech entrepreneur who had invented an app that revolutionized how businesses tracked shipments. Their meeting seemed almost scripted. Emily tripped over a camera cable, nearly toppled a tray of champagne, and found herself caught in Jonathan's arms. He apologized for standing in her way. She apologized for her clumsiness. They laughed together, genuine light laughter that made Emily's nerves flutter. Jonathan, with his sharp suit and confident stance, looked every bit the ambitious millionaire he was rumored to be. Yet he had a disarmingly gentle way of speaking to her, as though each sentence was meant to soothe her frazzled nerves. Over the following weeks, a whirlwind romance blossomed. Jonathan invited Emily to lavish dinners, private parties, and even introduced her to some of his powerful connections. Emily had come from a modest background, her father a retired schoolteacher, and her mother an accountant. The glamorous world Jonathan inhabited dazzled her, but more than the wealth she fell for the vision he painted of the future, a life built on success, love, and philanthropic endeavors. In those early days, Jonathan's ambition seemed boundless in a good way. He spoke passionately of using his fortune to make the world better. He had donated significant sums to hospitals, including an entire maternity wing that would one day carry his mother's name, Catherine Walters. Everything about him radiated potential and drive qualities that Emily found irresistible. By the end of that first month, they were inseparable. Emily discovered Jonathan had a quiet side, often born of stress, but she attributed it to the demands of his business. He was a man used to winning to leading, and sometimes that carried a sternness in his voice. But for each abrupt business call or firm instruction to his staff, he offered Emily a soft, unwavering affection. No one would have predicted how drastically the man behind those gentle eyes would change once Emily got pregnant. And certainly no one would have guessed how a single callous act blocking his own wife at the very hospital bearing his family name would spark a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The first signs of trouble crept in like shadows at dusk, subtle and easily overlooked if one was too enamored to notice. Emily and Jonathan tied the knot in a small, private ceremony at the Walters family estate. Only close friends and relatives attended, including Emily's parents and Jonathan's father, Harold Walters, who was a stoic figure with silver hair and eyes that never seemed to smile. Harold had built a smaller empire in real estate before Jonathan soared into the tech stratosphere. While father and son shared a knack for business, they diverged on tactics. Harold believed in slow, steady growth. Jonathan was all about rapid expansion. Their friction was palpable, but fatherly pride kept Harold from openly criticizing his son's methods in front of guests. Emily observed these dynamics but remained optimistic. After all differences in families were normal, and the love Jonathan showed her was enough to overcome any obstacle, or so she believed. Shortly after the wedding, Jonathan's company skyrocketed with a major partnership deal featuring an international shipping giant. The board of directors showered him with accolades. Stock prices soared. Suddenly, Jonathan found himself in meetings with venture capitalists, government representatives, and even exchanging pleasantries with Elon Musk at a tech conference in San Francisco. His circle changed, growing ever more exclusive. Meanwhile, Emily still worked at her marketing firm, though Jonathan urged her to quit. He wanted her to immerse herself in his world: charity functions, corporate dinners, lavish events. Emily enjoyed the ride, but she also valued her independence. She didn't want to be just a trophy wife. Jonathan would laugh it off, saying, "You're my partner, not my trophy." But the subtle push for her to resign never fully went away. Then came the day she discovered she was pregnant. A surge of happiness and anxiety gripped her. She knew Jonathan wanted children. At least he had often mentioned building a legacy. But she worried about the timing. His work schedule was chaotic. Sometimes he wouldn't come home until dawn. She tried to think carefully about the best way to tell him, eventually deciding on a quiet dinner at home. When Jonathan heard the news, the joy that lit his face was fleeting there and gone in a flash. He gave her a warm kiss, told her it was wonderful, and then retreated to his study to make several phone calls. Emily excused it as him needing a moment to process life-changing news, but a part of her felt uneasy. His reaction lacked the depth she'd expected. Over the following weeks, Jonathan grew more distant. He cancelled doctor's appointments Emily had arranged with some flimsy excuse about urgent meetings. He insisted on hiring a private obstetrician recommended by a colleague, saying it was more secure. The man had an exclusive contract with the Walters family's philanthropic foundation. Emily felt a gnawing sense of being sidelined from her own pregnancy. One night she found him on the phone in a heated argument. Words like share dilution board seat and maternity wing fiasco drifted from under the study door. When Emily asked if everything was all right, Jonathan forced a smile and said it was just corporate stuff she needn't worry about. Emily started to wonder if Jonathan's philanthropic image had always been about altruism, or if it was partly a carefully curated facade. The cracks in his persona were small, but they were there. She told herself relationships changed, especially with a baby on the way. She would have to adapt, but little did she know the biggest shock had yet to come. As Emily's belly grew, so did the tension in the Walters mansion. Gone were the days of carefree laughter and shared dreams. They were replaced by hushed arguments and cold indifference. Every attempt she made to discuss the future of their family, Jonathan brushed aside with talk of business expansions and new board members. One particularly chilly evening, Emily received a phone call from her old friend, Jane Anderson. They'd been roommates in college, but Jane had relocated to London. Emily confided in Jane, explaining how Jonathan had changed and how lonely she felt. A concerned Jane suggested Emily speak to a counselor, or at least talk to Jonathan in more depth. "Don't let yourself become invisible," Jane insisted over the phone. Emily nodded, tears threatening to fall, promising to try one more time. That same week, Emily prepared a simple dinner pasta with homemade sauce, a dish Jonathan used to love. She was determined to have a heartfelt conversation about their marriage and the baby. Jonathan arrived late, not even offering a reason. He took a few bites of his food and launched into a rant about incompetent staff at the office. Emily listened patiently, hoping the tirade would end so she could talk about them. But before she could say anything, Jonathan slammed his fork down and said, "Have you seen the news? The press is all over the hospital donation. They want to feature us on some top philanthropic families list. This is the exact sort of exposure we need." Emily blinked, confusion washing over her. Exposure for what? For the Walters family brand Emily. This baby is going to elevate our status. Families love seeing a philanthropic couple with a newborn. His eyes glinted with an unsettling combination of pride and calculation. Emily's stomach twisted. "Are you saying our child is a PR tool?" Jonathan realized his slip, shaking his head. No, of course not. But it's good timing. The new maternity wing named after my mother will be completed soon. The press will love a personal story to go along with it." Emily felt her heart drop. Whatever idealistic illusions she had about a fairy tale marriage melted away in that moment. "This is about your image," she asked, her voice quivering. He looked irritated, as though her question was an unwelcome distraction. "Our image, Emily. Everything we do now must be strategic. We're not just anyone. We're the Walters." Before she could protest, Jonathan's phone rang. He answered, ignoring Emily's presence. She watched him, tears welling, as he shot her a glance that signaled he was done with the discussion. From that night on, Emily understood in Jonathan's eyes she was not just a wife, but part of an empire-building machine. He didn't see her or her pregnancy as a sacred journey, just another asset in his portfolio of achievements. And while her love for him lingered, her trust began to fracture. In the final weeks of Emily's pregnancy, Jonathan held a massive gala to celebrate the completion of the Catherine Walters maternity wing at St. Lucia's Hospital. Emily, heavily pregnant, stood by his side as he offered grand speeches about the future of maternal health care and how the Walters family was committed to saving lives. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and the audience applauded. Emily's discomfort grew physically, her ankles swollen, her back aching, and emotionally, as she realized she was little more than a prop in this spectacle. After the speech, Jonathan introduced her to the hospital board members, praising her as the future mother of the Walters heir. She forced a polite smile, playing the part of supportive wife. A week later, Emily woke in the middle of the night to sharp pains. Alarmed, she called out for Jonathan, but he was nowhere to be found. He'd been spending more nights at his penthouse office, claiming it was closer to board meetings. She tried his phone, only to reach voicemail. Panicked, she called a car service to rush her to St. Lucia's Hospital, the very institution that bore Jonathan's mother's name. Upon arriving at the hospital entrance, Emily found security guards stationed at the glass doors. Confusion filled her when they refused her entry. One of the guards recognized her and looked uncertain, but then they received a message in their earpieces. Suddenly, they became resolute. "I'm sorry, ma'am," one guard said flatly. "We cannot allow you into the hospital at this time." Emily's head spun. "But this hospital is funded by my husband's foundation. I'm in labor." The guard, clearly uncomfortable, repeated, "I'm sorry, we have orders." Disbelieving, Emily clutched her stomach as another contraction ripped through her. She tried again, explaining who she was, but the guards refused to budge. The hospital staff inside looked on anxiously from behind the glass, but no one dared intervene. In her anguish, Emily understood one horrifying reality: Jonathan must have orchestrated this. She felt betrayed, confused, and desperate. A nurse slipped out from a side entrance, whispering an apology. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said, tears in her eyes. "We can't go against Mr. Walters' direct orders. Our jobs depend on it." It felt surreal. Emily, the pregnant wife of a millionaire who donated millions to this hospital, was being denied entry to give birth in a wing named after her mother-in-law. After multiple contractions that left her gasping for breath on the sidewalk, She had no choice but to leave in search of another hospital, the driver frantically hitting the gas as Emily moaned in pain in the back seat. That night, Emily found an older hospital across town, one that had no fancy wings or philanthropic ties. The staff welcomed her with open arms. On a stormy evening, with thunder shaking the windows and lightning illuminating the dark sky, Emily gave birth to two beautiful twin boys. The moment she saw their tiny faces, she knew her life's purpose was forever changed. But the shock of Jonathan's betrayal still stung like salt in a fresh wound. She vowed to protect her sons at all costs, promising herself that Jonathan Walters would never have the chance to use them as pawns in his twisted empire again. The birth was complicated. Emily lost a significant amount of blood, and her blood pressure spiked. She spent days recovering alone in a tiny hospital room, hugging her newborns for comfort. Nurses brought her extra blankets, crocheted little caps for the babies, and comforted her with soft lullabies. These strangers showed her more compassion than her own husband, who hadn't even called. Unable to reach Jonathan, Emily took solace in contacting her friend Jane Anderson once more. Jane, now a successful advertising executive in London, was appalled by the story. She insisted Emily take some time away, maybe even leave the country and move in with her. But Emily was physically weak, her resources limited. She had no access to the vast Walters bank accounts. Realizing she needed immediate help, especially legal help, Jane put her in touch with an American friend based in New York, a lawyer named Brooke Knight. Brooke wasn't just any lawyer. She had worked for top firms like Cravath, Swaine and more. Although she'd recently stepped back from the corporate hustle, Brooke still maintained her connections. Over the phone, Emily recounted the horrifying experience of being turned away from the hospital. Brooke was livid. He effectively endangered the lives of his wife and children, Brooke stated, her voice trembling with indignation. We need to keep documentation of everything that's happened. Also, we should see if there's a pattern of controlling behavior that can be used as evidence. Exhausted but determined, Emily agreed. She kept the hospital bills, the security guard's statements, and any communication she'd received that hinted Jonathan orchestrated the ban. She had the name of the nurse who slipped outside to apologize. Slowly but steadily, Emily and Brooke built a case against Jonathan, though they both suspected it would be an uphill battle. Meanwhile, in the Walters mansion, the staff was under strict orders not to speak to Emily or mention her to visitors. Jonathan told them that Emily had chosen to leave and that any questions regarding her absence were unwelcome. Some staff members quietly questioned Jonathan's story, but fear kept them silent. Unknown to Jonathan, a more formidable ally than Brooke Knight was about to step onto the stage, someone who wielded not only legal expertise, but also a fortune that could rival, if not eclipse, Jonathan's. And when that person arrived, the game was set to change in ways Jonathan would never have predicted. It was Jane Anderson's connections that led them to Vanessa Kim, a lawyer of legendary reputation. Her name had circulated among the highest echelons of international law, known to be a billionaire in her own right, thanks to a combination of generational wealth-savvy investments in tech startups and a string of high-profile legal victories. Vanessa Kim was said to be unstoppable in court. When Emily first heard about Vanessa, she was skeptical. She wondered why someone so powerful would take interest in her situation. But Jane assured Emily that Vanessa had a strong sense of justice, especially for cases involving women who had been mistreated by powerful men. She's known for championing the underdog, Jane explained, and she never loses. A week after Emily had returned home from the hospital where she birthed her twins, she found herself living in a modest apartment in Queens. Brooke had arranged a temporary stay for her. The place was clean, but small, barely large enough for Emily, her twins, whom she had named Alexander and Gabriel, and the baby essentials. She felt a combination of relief and heartbreak each time she rocked the babies to sleep in that cramped room. Relief, because at least she was safe. Heartbreak, because the life she had imagined raising her children in a warm, loving home felt like a far-off fantasy. When Vanessa Kim finally called, Emily almost dropped the phone in shock. The woman's voice was calm, confident, and surprisingly caring. "Emily," she said, "I've been briefed on your situation. I want you to know you're not alone. Sometimes it takes a storm to reveal a rainbow, and we'll find yours." Emily felt the sting of tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm overwhelmed. I understand," Vanessa replied. "But I want you to concentrate on your recovery and caring for your children. Let me handle the fight. I'm flying into New York tomorrow. We'll meet, and I'll explain what comes next." True to her word, Vanessa arrived in New York with her entourage and headed straight for Emily's little apartment. She wore a tailored black suit, her dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, exuding an air of both power and warmth. Emily expected a quick conversation, maybe some documents to sign, and a promise to keep in touch. Instead, Vanessa spent hours listening to every detail of Emily's story, from her first meeting with Jonathan to the slow erosion of their relationship to the final betrayal at the hospital doors. Vanessa asked pointed questions. "Have you received any direct threats from Jonathan or his team since you left? How did he respond to your pregnancy initially? Did he ever verbally or physically threaten you?" Emily answered them all. The more she spoke, the clearer her resolve became. Vanessa ended the meeting by gently taking Emily's hands. "Don't worry, my dear. This won't be easy, but I don't step into a ring unless I plan to win. Jonathan Walters thinks his fortune and influence are enough to quash anything. He's wrong. Now get some rest. I'll have a few associates come by tomorrow to prepare the next steps." For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a spark of hope. She gazed at her sleeping twins, tears forming again. But this time, they were tears of relief, not despair. 2 days later, Vanessa Kim returned with a small legal team, paralegals, and junior attorneys carrying laptops and case files. Emily's living room transformed into a makeshift war room. Emily watched in amazement as these professionals cross-referenced data, scoured the internet for records, and whispered among themselves about subpoenas and potential injunctions. "Jonathan Walters is preparing for a messy divorce," said one of the paralegals, flipping through pages. "He's already lined up high-priced attorneys to discredit Emily's claims." Emily felt her heart clutch. That meant he was aware that she was building a case. She wondered what he thought of the twins. Did he even care that he had sons? Now, Vanessa calmly stated, "We'll file for custody and also push for financial support, given that Emily was effectively kicked out. But first, I want to see if we can break the NDAs that are likely in place with the hospital staff. That will give us eyewitness accounts of how she was barred." It didn't take long to uncover the reason behind Jonathan's actions at the hospital. One of Vanessa's investigators discovered that Jonathan feared a scandal if Emily went into labor there unaccompanied. There were rumors swirling about his involvement with a biotech company under federal scrutiny for fraudulent trials. The hospital had ties to that company, and Jonathan wanted no unpredictable variables that could leak to the press. He chose his corporate secrets over the safety of his wife and children. Vanessa summarized, her tone deadly calm. The hospital staff were following orders to protect the Walters brand from any public relations disasters. They never dreamed this would backfire so spectacularly. Emily's face paled. It felt surreal, her life orchestrated behind closed doors, her own health and that of her babies compromised for the sake of Jonathan's next lucrative deal. "We'll make it known," Vanessa said. "We'll show that Jonathan's philanthropic persona is just a veneer, and we'll demand justice, not just monetary compensation. The world needs to know what really happened." Emily closed her eyes, exhaling a trembling breath. "I just want my children to have a normal life, away from all this." Vanessa offered a reassuring nod. "They will. We're going to make sure of it." The first major move came in the form of a press conference orchestrated by Vanessa Kim and her team. They booked a modest hotel ballroom, inviting local and national media outlets to a statement of concern regarding hospital misconduct. Emily stood behind a podium flanked by Vanessa on one side and Brooke Knight on the other. Cameras flashed. Reporters jostled for position. Emily felt her pulse racing. She hadn't wanted such a public display, but Vanessa argued that controlling the narrative was vital. A hush fell over the room as Emily began, voice quivering but resolute. "My name is Emily Walters. I'm here to share the story of how I, while heavily pregnant, was barred from a hospital whose maternity wing was funded by my husband's charitable foundation." Gasps and murmurs swept across the crowd. She recounted the events, tears in her eyes detailing the pain, fear, and betrayal she experienced. Finally, Vanessa stepped forward. "My client nearly lost her life and the lives of her twins due to the reckless actions of Mr. Jonathan Walters, who prioritized corporate secrecy over his family. This is more than a private marital dispute. It's a matter of public concern, exposing how money and influence can corrupt healthcare institutions meant to serve the vulnerable." Within hours, the story surged across social media. Hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and Hospital Scandal trended. News anchors debated the ethics of wealthy donors exerting undue power over medical institutions. Jonathan's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing a statement that the hospital incident was a miscommunication and that Jonathan never intended to block his wife. But the damage was done. The public's initial shock turned into fury. Talk shows invited medical ethicists, and many criticized how philanthropic power could be misused. Emily's tearful press conference footage circulated, painting her as a sympathetic figure. Back in his penthouse, Jonathan seethed. He had prided himself on controlling the media narrative. Now Emily and her billionaire lawyer had flipped the script. Allies began to distance themselves from him. Quiet phone calls ended with polite rejections or unreturned messages. Investors grew wary, questioning Jonathan's judgment and moral compass. Despite the storm swirling around him, Jonathan refused to back down. He prepared his own legal counterattack with an expensive team from a top law firm. He had no intention of relinquishing control of his empire or his children. Thus began the legal battle that would shape the rest of their lives. In the weeks that followed, the courtroom became a battlefield. Emily, frail from her childbirth and still healing emotionally, showed remarkable courage as she attended hearings. Jonathan's legal team arrived each day with boxes of documents, aiming to bury Emily's case in technicalities. Yet Vanessa Kim was unfazed. She countered every motion with meticulous research. A legion of paralegals sifted through Jonathan's finances, philanthropic records, and even personal correspondences. They traced the chain of command at the hospital on the night Emily was turned away. One after another, hospital employees stepped forward, some under anonymity, to confirm that they had received direct instructions from Jonathan's office not to admit Emily. Jonathan's lawyers tried to discredit Emily as a gold digger who sought to exploit the Walters name. They pointed out her modest background, insinuating she was after a massive divorce settlement. But Vanessa flipped the narrative. Isn't it telling that a so-called gold digger is living in a tiny apartment in Queens, struggling to afford diapers, while Jonathan Walters resides in a multi-million-dollar estate? The judge's expression turned grim at that line. The tide was slowly turning against Jonathan, but he still had powerful connections. Rumors swirled that he was pressuring members of the hospital board to provide falsified statements. One critical day in court, the nurse who had spoken to Emily outside the hospital's side entrance took the stand. Her voice trembled, but she was resolute. We were told plain as day not to let Mrs. Walters in, that Mr. Walters had some big negotiation going on and didn't want any public scene. People were afraid they'd lose their jobs. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Jonathan's attorney tried to pick holes in her testimony, but she held firm. When asked why she risked her career, the nurse replied softly, "Because what happened was wrong. Emily Walters could have died. Her babies could have died. I became a nurse to help people, not to become part of someone's cover-up." Later, Emily caught Jonathan glaring at her from across the courtroom. His anger was palpable, but she also sensed something else: fear. For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes, as though he realized his empire might be crumbling. Yet the final blow had yet to come, and it would arrive in a form Jonathan never anticipated. 2 months into the legal proceedings, a shocking revelation emerged. Jonathan's fortune was not as secure as it appeared. His biotech investment had caught the attention of federal investigators for fraudulent clinical trials. The rumor that he tried to hide Emily's hospital visit to avoid negative publicity now found a deeper footing. Vanessa Kim used her expansive network to confirm that the SEC and FBI were looking into allegations that Jonathan had profited from insider information before the scandal broke. Not only was he risking corporate lawsuits, but there was also a hint of potential criminal charges if proven complicit in fraud. When the news leaked, Jonathan's world recoiled. Investors pulled out the board, demanded emergency meetings, and the company's stock price plummeted. Suddenly, Jonathan faced ruin not just in his personal life, but also in his professional empire. Emily, on the other hand, had conflicting emotions. Part of her felt vindicated seeing Jonathan's cruelty and greed catch up to him. But she also remembered the man she fell in love with, the one who first caught her in his arms at a charity ball. She wondered if that man was merely an illusion all along. Meanwhile, Vanessa pressed the advantage. She proposed that Emily file a separate civil suit, not just for marital assets, but for punitive damages related to the hospital incident. "We have substantial evidence of reckless endangerment," Vanessa explained in Emily's cramped living room, where the babies cooed softly in their cribs. "You could be entitled to a significant amount of compensation. Not that money fixes the emotional harm, but it will ensure a stable future for your children." Emily hesitated. "I want my children to be taken care of, but I also don't want them to carry the stigma of a public scandal." Vanessa offered a compassionate smile. "That stigma isn't yours to bear. It's Jonathan's. And as for the twins, we'll protect them every step of the way. Trust me." With that reassurance, Emily signed the necessary documents, setting in motion a legal chain that threatened to dismantle Jonathan's carefully curated public image once and for all. As Jonathan's empire wobbled, some of his closest associates fled like rats from a sinking ship. Corporate partners who once praised his brilliance now refused to take his calls. Even Harold Walters, his father, issued a statement distancing himself from Jonathan's biotech fiasco, calling it regrettable. Harold's statement, however, was a tactical move. Secretly, he arranged a meeting with Emily, requesting it through one of Vanessa's associates. Initially, Emily was hesitant. Harold had never shown her warmth, but curiosity and a bit of compassion led her to accept. They met in a quiet corner of an upscale cafe. Harold, impeccably dressed, sipped his espresso. His stoic demeanor never wavered, but Emily noticed a flicker of remorse in his eyes. "I had no idea what Jonathan was truly up to," Harold began, voice grave. "The hospital fiasco, the biotech scandal, it's beyond the pale." Emily listened in silence, her posture guarded. Harold continued, "He's always wanted to surpass me. Maybe I pushed him too hard. Regardless, I won't defend what he did to you. I came to ask if we can resolve this quietly." Emily's eyebrows rose. Quietly, after all that's happened? Harold cleared his throat, struggling to maintain composure. "Look, if this drags on, you'll be in court for years. The press will swarm around you, your children, and your every move. Let me help negotiate a settlement. You'll receive everything you need financially." The Walters name remains somewhat intact. Emily felt a wave of anger. "So you think money can fix this? After your son nearly risked my life and our children's lives?" Harold's expression hardened. "Jonathan is still the father of those children. One day, they may want to know him. It's better for all if this doesn't end in total destruction." She sat back, tears threatening, remembering the fear and betrayal she felt that night at the hospital doors. "I can't make that decision alone. I have a lawyer and we have a case." Harold nodded. "I'll expect to hear from Ms. Kim." Before leaving, Harold placed a business card on the table. "For what it's worth, Emily, I am sorry. Jonathan changed power. Does that to people." As he walked away, Emily clutched the card, torn between wanting closure and needing justice. For the moment, her resolve remained unshaken. Jonathan had to answer for his actions, no matter how wealthy the Walters family might be. The courthouse loomed like a fortress of reckoning. Every morning, the steps were lined with reporters, microphones, and flashing cameras. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. The trial, Emily's civil suit for endangerment and emotional distress, coupled with the custody hearing for the twins, was one of the most followed legal dramas in recent memory. For the public, it was the fall of a tech titan. For Emily Walters, it was a battle for dignity, truth, and her children's future. Jonathan arrived each day with a shrinking entourage. The man who once commanded rooms with confidence now wore exhaustion like a second skin. Emily, meanwhile, stepped into the courtroom with quiet strength, flanked by Vanessa Kim and Brooke Knight. Sometimes she carried one of the twins on her hip, until the nanny took them to the family room down the hall. It was a reminder to everyone watching, this wasn't just about power and scandal. It was about lives. Vanessa led the legal charge like a master conductor. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of being denied medical care during labor. A trauma counselor explained the long-term effects such neglect could have on both mother and children. Financial analysts picked apart Jonathan's corporate dealings, demonstrating how his philanthropic donations often served as covers for business maneuvers. But the turning point came when the hospital security guard testified. "I was given explicit instructions," he said, his voice low but steady. "We were told not to let Mrs. Walters in under any circumstance. We didn't know she was in labor at first, but even when we found out, we were told our jobs were on the line if we disobeyed." Gasps rippled across the gallery. Jonathan's legal team attempted to discredit the guard, but the damage had been done. The truth, cold and undeniable, had made it into the record. Then came the nurse, the same one who had whispered apologies through tears to a screaming, laboring Emily on the hospital steps. "I knew it was wrong," she said, wiping her eyes. She was begging us, and her voice cracked. I still hear her voice sometimes. Why did you stay quiet until now? Vanessa asked, gently. The nurse looked straight at the jury. Because I was scared. But now, I'm more scared of what happens if people like him aren't held accountable. The courtroom fell into heavy silence. Even Jonathan didn't look up. When it was his turn to take the stand, Jonathan tried to regain his composure. Dressed in a tailored suit and speaking in calm tones, he presented himself as misunderstood, a man whose staff had misinterpreted his orders, who had been estranged from his wife and unaware of her circumstances. But Vanessa was relentless. You're telling this court you didn't know your wife was in labor? I knew she was close, Jonathan admitted, but I thought she'd contact her private physician. She did, Vanessa replied coolly. But he was unreachable, and she called you multiple times. He hesitated. I was in meetings, critical negotiations, so your business negotiations were more important than the lives of your wife and unborn children. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. That's not what I meant, Vanessa pressed. Then what did you mean when you told your security team to deny her entry to the hospital, that it was a PR liability for her to give birth there without your presence? He said nothing. Mr. Walters, Vanessa's voice sharpened. Are you aware that your wife almost died that night? That your sons were born under emergency conditions because you valued image over life? Jonathan looked down. I didn't want things to get out of control. They already had, Vanessa said, and sat down. By the end of the day, the courtroom's energy had shifted. Jurors glanced at Emily with sympathy. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the judge, often stoic, looked grim. Emily didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply held her sons tighter that evening, whispering promises into their soft curls. Whatever happens next, she murmured, I will never let anyone hurt us again. And though Jonathan still had lawyers and money, Emily had something far more powerful, the truth and the will to fight for it until the very end. The courtroom sat in breathless silence as the jury foreperson stood envelope in hand. Emily squeezed Brooke's hand on one side and Vanessa's on the other, her heart thudding in her chest like a war drum. This was it, the moment where justice either found its voice or fell silent beneath wealth and power. In the matter of reckless endangerment and emotional distress, the foreperson announced, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Emily Walters. Emily's breath hitched. The tears came fast, unstoppable, as the rest of the verdict was read. Jonathan Walters was found liable for not only putting Emily and their unborn children at risk, but also for orchestrating an intentional act of harm, cloaked in corporate deceit. The jury awarded Emily a substantial sum in damages enough to ensure a stable future for her and the twins, and a symbolic blow to the empire Jonathan had once ruled without question. The judge followed with a ruling on custody. Emily was granted full physical and legal custody of Alexander and Gabriel. Jonathan would be allowed supervised visitation contingent upon completion of a psychological evaluation and proof of active parental rehabilitation. The courtroom murmured, but Emily heard none of it, only the sound of her own heartbeat and the quiet sigh of relief that escaped her lips. Jonathan sat at the defense table, stunned into silence. His attorney flipped through papers, mechanically, already discussing the appeal that would be filed. But no legal motion could erase what had just occurred. For the first time, Jonathan Walters, man of power, persuasion, and privilege, had been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning as reporters flooded the steps. Vanessa stood beside Emily, her voice crisp and clear. Today is a reminder that justice does not yield to influence, that hospitals are for healing, not platforms for ego, and that women, especially mothers, will not be silenced. When Emily finally stepped to the mic, her voice trembled but held. I never wanted a fight. I just wanted safety for myself and for my sons. What happened to me should never happen to anyone else. I hope this case inspires change, not just in policies, but in how we see the people behind headlines. The video of that moment went viral. Across social media, hashtags like #JusticeForEmily and hospital reform now trended for days. Celebrities and public figures voiced support. Nurses' unions issued statements praising her bravery. Meanwhile, Jonathan's reputation unraveled. Corporate partners distanced themselves. His board of directors voted to suspend him as CEO pending further federal investigation. Stock in his company plummeted as news of insider trading probes leaked. For Emily, however, the legal victory wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control over a life that had once been manipulated from the shadows. The money meant freedom, not luxury. She immediately began searching for a new home, one with space for her sons to grow, and without marble halls that echoed with betrayal. And in a move that surprised even Vanessa, Emily donated a portion of the awarded damages to the very hospital that took her in the night she gave birth, creating a scholarship fund for underpaid maternity nurses. It was her quiet rebellion against the system that once locked her out, and her loud gratitude for those who showed her compassion when it mattered most. She wasn't just walking away with a court victory, she was walking into a future on her own terms. The chapter of fear was over. What lay ahead was a life of purpose. And Emily Walters, survivor turned advocate, was finally free to live it. Months melted into a year, and with each passing season, Emily rebuilt her life, not from the ashes of her old world, but from seeds she planted with care, courage, and quiet defiance. Her new home sat nestled in a tranquil corner of Westchester County. It wasn't the grand estate she had once roamed, but a modest, sunlit house with a wraparound porch and a backyard that welcomed birds and laughter alike. It was hers. It was peace. The garden became her sanctuary. Emily spent mornings planting roses, daisies, and tulips, each bloom a quiet act of reclaiming beauty. Alexander and Gabriel, now toddlers full of wonder, would race across the grass, with squeals of joy tumbling over each other in fits of giggles. Their innocence, untouched by the darkness they had narrowly escaped, reminded Emily why she had fought so fiercely. Jane Anderson, her college friend and unwavering supporter, flew in from London every few months. She brought book stories and comfort that transcended distance. The guest room was always ready, always warm. "This is the home you were meant to have," Jane once whispered, watching the boys nap on the rug beside their toys. Emily could only nod, her heart too full for words. But perhaps the most surprising gift of this new chapter was the friendship that had blossomed with Vanessa Kim. The powerhouse attorney, once a name spoken with reverence in courtrooms, had become something else to Emily: a mentor, a confidant, and at times even a sister figure. One afternoon, as the two sat sipping jasmine tea under the pergola, Vanessa looked over and said, "We've got an opening at my advocacy foundation, outreach and strategy. You'd be brilliant." Emily hesitated. Her past life in marketing felt like a distant echo, but the fire inside her, the one that had carried her through betrayal and trauma, now burned with purpose. "If it means helping women who went through what I did, I'm in," she said, her voice steady. And so Emily re-entered the working world, but not as a decorative appendage to a powerful man. She stood on her own merits, using her voice to fight for others. She traveled to conferences, spoke on panels about medical ethics, and helped draft policy recommendations to protect patients from donor overreach in healthcare. Every step forward was a healing balm, not just for her, but for the countless women who had messaged her after her story broke. As for Jonathan, he remained a fractured presence. Court-ordered, supervised visits occurred sporadically. He appeared thinner, diminished. During those brief encounters, he sometimes looked at Emily with something resembling regret. But she kept her distance not out of spite, but out of wisdom. Healing didn't mean reopening wounds. It meant learning to live without fear of them tearing open again. Emily's life wasn't perfect, but it was free. It was hers, and it was filled with meaning. She had emerged not just intact, but stronger, not a victim, not a symbol, but a woman who had reclaimed her name and reshaped her destiny. 2 years had passed since that harrowing night. Emily Walters was denied entry to the very hospital her husband helped build. In that time, the Catherine Walters maternity wing had gone from a symbol of philanthropic pride to a case study in ethical reform. Following the lawsuit and media firestorm, St. Lucia's Hospital underwent a sweeping administrative overhaul. New leadership replaced the old board, and a strict set of protocols were enacted to ensure no pregnant woman would ever again be turned away based on private instructions. For Emily, the changes were more than just headlines, they were justice realized. On a clear spring morning, with soft sunlight filtering through city haze, Emily returned to the hospital not as a patient or a victim, but as a woman who had fought and won. She walked the halls with quiet dignity, a small canvas tote bag swinging from her shoulder filled with carefully prepared care packages for the mothers-to-be. Each bundle contained essential toiletries, a handwritten note of encouragement, and a baby blanket she'd folded herself the night before while her son slept. The maternity wing bustled with life nurses cheerfully greeting patients, the gentle beeping of monitors, and the muffled sound of lullabies from recovery rooms. Emily moved from room to room, her heart full, as she spoke with women navigating the same vulnerable path she once had. Some recognized her from the viral press conference, their eyes widening with gratitude and admiration. Others saw only a warm, smiling woman with kind eyes and gentle words. She didn't mind either way. After her rounds, Emily paused in the grand hallway where Jonathan had once delivered a televised speech about legacy and generosity. She remembered how he had wrapped an arm around her back, speaking of family values and community impact, all while orchestrating her exclusion from this very place. The marble walls and engraved plaques still gleamed, but they no longer held power over her emotions. The hurt was still there, faint, like an old scar, but it no longer bled. Clutching her twin's small hands, Emily turned away from the past. Alexander babbled about the nurse who gave him a sticker while Gabriel tugged playfully at the edge of her coat. They were thriving, bright, healthy, and full of joy. She stepped into the sunlight just as her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Vanessa Kim lit up the screen. New case. Young mother, denied emergency coverage. Want you on it? Emily smiled. 2 years ago, she had been too weak to fight for herself. Now, she was part of a movement that gave voice to women who felt invisible, silenced, or dismissed. She had gone from a silent partner in someone else's empire to a fierce advocate helping others reclaim their power. Her days were no longer filled with lavish dinners or red carpet galas, but with purpose advocacy meetings, hospital board discussions, and quiet moments of reflection with her children. And that purpose, she realized, felt richer than any luxury Jonathan had once flaunted. As she helped her boys into their car seats and slid behind the wheel, Emily looked back at the hospital one final time. It no longer symbolized betrayal. It had become the first page of a new chapter, one she had authored herself. She wasn't just Emily Walters, the woman who'd been blocked from giving birth. She was the woman who had walked back, in head-high arms, full of love, heart full of fire, and left behind a legacy of her own. Sometimes it takes heartbreak, betrayal, and a harrowing brush with disaster to discover your true strength. Emily Walters' journey from a pregnant woman, locked out of her own husband's hospital, to a victorious mother of twins, backed by an unstoppable billionaire lawyer, proves that no empire built on lies can stand forever. She found the courage to fight for justice, reclaim her independence, and dedicate herself to helping others who face similar hardships. If you were inspired by this gripping story of resilience and triumph, please consider supporting our channel. Give this video a like, share it with friends who need a reminder that courage can overcome any obstacle, and subscribe for more riveting real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these empowering narratives to light and might just give someone else the strength to stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching.